Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or whenever you watch this video. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Aisyah Andina Sekar Lestari. I'm a 7th semester student from University of Pamulang. I would like to say thank you to my Introduction to Psycholinguistics lecturer, Mr. Tito, for giving me a chance in making this video as my final test assignment. In this session, I will discuss about language acquisition. What is language acquisition? Language acquisition is a process in which a child acquires a language unconsciously. In this process, children hone their ability to understand language as well as to use it in communication with others. In language acquisition, children unconsciously understand the structure of language in terms of its rules and features properly and correctly, especially in the first language. The ability to understand language that has been in them since they were born is unconsciously stimulated to understand the language. When using the language in communication, we are not always aware of the rules of the language we are acquiring, but we have the intuition to justify the language we produce. Language acquisition occurs because there is communication that occurs naturally, which subconsciously stimulates our capability to acquire the language so that communication takes place. There are several stages in the language acquisition process. The first is babbling. During the first weeks of a newborn, the baby will begin to recognize his mother's voice. From there, at the age of the baby from 6 to 8 months, the baby begins to acquire vocals and try to produce them. As a result of capturing the sounds around him, the baby begins to adapt and imitate the vocals he gets, although with limited success. The second stage is one-word stage. This stage is marked by one-word sentences, where at this stage, nouns play about 50% of the use to convey the meaning of the child. Meanwhile, verbs and modifiers only play about 30% at this stage. For the sentence example is like the word eat for the sentence I want to eat now. Next is two-word stage. This stage is an advanced level of the one-word stage. At this stage, the two words spoken include one word for the predicate and one word for the subject. For example, doggy walk. For the sentence, the dog is being walked. At this stage, the use of modifiers began to appear, such as that dog or daddy sleep for the question sentences. Moreover, the addition of suffix "ing" in the words used to describe current situation also occurs at this stage, such as in the sentence, cat sleeping. In the early multi-word stage, children began to combine 3 to 4 words to include enough information in sentences that sound reasonable. At this stage, the child begins to see the link between the word and its object. The examples of sentences uttered at this stage are what his name, daddy eat rice, and he is playing ball. Then, at the later multi-word stage, children are able to construct words better with more word mastery, which is around 50 to 30,000 words. Language acquisition are divided into two types, which is the first language acquisition and the second language acquisition. First language acquisition refers to the way children learn their native language, which is the first language that children acquire. The first language is obtained by the child through their parents and environment. Second language acquisition refers to the learning of another language or languages besides the native language, which is the language acquired by children through the school environment and their circle of friends. According to Stephen Krashen, there are 5 hypotheses of language acquisition. Those are the acquisition learning hypothesis, the monitor hypothesis, the natural order hypothesis, the input hypothesis, and the effective filter hypothesis. The acquisition learning hypothesis. The acquisition learning distinction is the most fundamental of the 5 hypotheses in Krashen's theory and the most widely known among linguists and language teachers. The acquired system or acquisition is the product of a subconscious process very similar to the process children undergo when they acquire their first language. According to Krashen, there are 2 independent systems of brain language performance, the acquired system and the learned system. It requires meaningful interaction in the target language natural communication, in which speakers are concentrated not in the form of their utterances but in the communicative act. The next is the monitor hypothesis. The monitor hypothesis explains the relationship between the acquisition and learning and defines the influence of the latter on the former. The monitoring function is the practical result of the learned grammar. According to Krashen, the acquisition system is the utterance initiator while the learning system performs the role of the monitor or the editor. The role of the monitor is minor, being used only to correct deviations from normal speech and to give speech a more polished appearance. The next is the natural order hypothesis. Natural order hypothesis is based on research findings by Delay and Bird in 1974, by Fatman in 1975, by Makino in 1980, which is recited in Krashen in 1987, which suggested that the acquisition of grammatical structures follows a natural order which is predictable. For a given language, some grammatical structures tend to be acquired early while others late. These orders seem to be independent of the learner's age, first language background, conditions of exposure, and although the agreement between individual acquirers was not always 100% in studies, there were statistically significant similarities that reinforced the existence of a natural order of language acquisition. The next is the input hypothesis. The input hypothesis is Krashen's attempt to explain how the learner acquires a second language, how second language acquisition takes place. The input hypothesis is only concerned with acquisition, not learning. According to this hypothesis, the learner improves and progresses along the natural order when he or she receives second language input that is one step beyond his or her current stage of linguistic competence. And the last is the effective filter hypothesis. The effective filter hypothesis embodies Krashen's view that a number of effective variables play a facilitative but non-causal role in second language acquisition. These variables include motivation, self-confidence, anxiety, and personal traits. Krashen claims that learners with high motivation, self-confidence, a good self-image, a low level of anxiety, and extroversion are better equipped for success in second language acquisition. Low motivation, low self-esteem, anxiety, introversion, and inhibition can raise the effective filter and form a mental block that prevents comprehensible input from being used for acquisition. In other words, when the filter is up, it impedes language acquisition. And that brings us to the end of the discussion about language acquisition. Thank you so much for your interest and attention.